I'm very excited about this panel. The title of the panel is Sharing Incident Data While Under Attack. And that title should be familiar with a handful of our partners in the audience. This was something that was suggested by our strategic partnership members. It's a growing concern among many of our partners, and we're sure it's a growing concern amongst many within the industry. So I am very pleased that we have 5 noted people on the area who are dealing with this almost daily, from different sectors within the industry, as well as from one of our faculty member here at Purdue, and a person from government. So we have a very diverse group, and I'm excited about the comments that we're going to hear. So our 5 panelists, if I take them in the order across here, from the left first, Dave Fiore from CyberPoint. He's a senior systems engineer there. And next to him is the CIO of Indiana, Paul Baltzwell. Next to him is Kevin Nauer, who is a chief security researcher at Sandia National Labs. Next is Sam Lyles. Sam is associate professor here at Purdue in the College of Technology and runs the cyber forensics lab here. And then finally at the end is Michael West. Michael is the Vice President of Cyber Investigations for Fidelity Investments. Kevin, can you start us off this morning? All right, so for the audience, each panelist is going to speak approximately 3, 5, 6 minutes on some of their general comments on the area, and then we'll return to the dais. And then after each of the panelists have made some comments, we're going to open it up to the audience to ask questions. So as you're thinking of things, you'll be able to direct questions to any of the panelists directly or to the panel in general. Kevin?
There we go. Okay, so I'm Kevin Nauer. So I've been working sort of in the InfoSec, cybersecurity and digital forensics field for about 20 years. Oh, there we go. Okay, and part of that was in the Army military intelligence, and then the last 10 years or so has been at Sandia, doing actual incident response operations, working at the Sandia CSIRT team. So when we talk about sharing incident data, it's sort of one of my pet projects. And I started this, and I wanted to just show this because George had his, pandas, bears, and kitties or whatever. So I said, well, if he can have pandas, bears, and kittens, then I can show my original one that I came up with my bear from like 2009 or 10. And so when I first came up with a project for Sandia to share incident data across all the Department of Energy nuclear weapon labs, we came up with a thing called Grunt. And so we wanted to come up with a fun thing because everyone wanted to share data, but as George said, you got to keep the lawyers busy. So basically, I came up with this nice little thing because lawyers, not to say anything about their intelligence, but they're just not technically smart. So if you show them a nice, fun picture of a bear, and you say, hey, this is what I want you guys to work on, those lawyers will sit there all day, and it's really fun to watch those lawyers. But obviously I'm being facetious a little bit. But the main thing is I came up with this project 5 years ago. It's called the Global Repository and Unified Natural Text Search for Cyber Tracer, right? And that's a lot of techno-babble, right, for saying, well, we really wanted to share data among these incident response teams across the nuclear weapons labs, and we wanted to do it in a very, technically innovative way where we could actually have authentication, security domains talking to other domains, and establish all this kind of complex authentication before it really became popular. Right now we have OpenAuth 2 and OpenID projects and all these other things to enable internet sharing. Back then we didn't quite, everything was being talked about, so we had Shibboleth and we had SAML and we had all this other good stuff. Guess what? I got funding for about 2 years to do this, and the lawyers got involved, and it went nowhere. All right, and so it's very, very disappointing to me because I had been working on doing this for many years across our military intelligence teams or incident response teams and across the DOE labs, and we were very successful at doing it at a peer-to-peer level. But however, once we got the managers and lawyers involved, it absolutely went nowhere. And we're just talking government entity to government entity within the same agency, not even across different agencies. And I said, God, we're in such a sad state of affairs. So when we talk about intelligence, like George was mentioning with his talk, really intelligence is really, really driven by the sharing of information amongst peers. And that is really the only way that we can develop. So I just wanted to show this kind of slide. And there was one more, since I have this up here, that I wanted to show. Okay, so that was my grand scheme of things, right? And, it's like, okay, all these circles on the outside are talking about, all the DOE nuclear weapons sites. So we actually have about 12 or 13. The three big ones are Los Alamos, Sandia National Labs, and Lawrence Livermore. And then we have about 8 or so facilities that produce, dispose of, or do other things with the weapon systems. And we said, wow, because I had been out to pretty much every one of these sites during the course of my time on the incident response team, and had helped them actually resolve major cyber attacks on every one of those sites. And we realized that each site was actually very, very closely tied into other sites. And there was no way you could say, wow, we here being, Sandia, wherever we're at here, over here, we'll really, really lock down our stuff because we got a team of about 3 or 4 people that have been doing this for a while, and we'll not worry about these other sites. Well, that doesn't work, because we're all tied together through these Department of Energy types of VPNs and different databases and applications and everything else. So really, it didn't make any sense whatsoever for us as Sandia to build up our team without helping the other sites. And so my plan was to actually provide not only information, incident data sharing, but also to share personnel. Right? So as we develop subject matter experts in certain areas, because no one can be an expert in every area in incident response and digital forensics, we said, wow, we'll actually send out, you have a real need to understand how the SMS server on your Windows Enterprise was attacked. Okay, we have a person that has spent 10 years developing SMS and is working on an incident response team and has just analyzed some malware that was actually doing that on one of our servers, so why don't we send them out to your site for 2 weeks? And that was all great, and we actually still do that on occasion, as long as we keep the lawyers busy off in their room, in the back room there, because we have not formalized this whatsoever. We realized once we got to the formal state. So I finally realized, the government spent a lot of money on these things called ISACs, Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, and it finally occurred to me this morning when George said something about the lawyers. That's what those were created for, was to keep the lawyers busy, right? Those ISACs, as far as I can tell, provide no value to techies like myself, but they sure do provide value to the lawyers and the bureaucrats that would prevent us from doing our job, right? So that's pretty much all I got to say. I hit the black button, so it should go black.
Okay,
There we go.
very good. Thank you, Kevin. Next up is our bureaucrat. No, our State of Indiana CIO, Paul Balto.
Well, so I want to apologize right off. I'm getting over a cold, so I'll try not to snuff too much while I'm talking. And yeah, I guess I am one of those bureaucrats because we actually have a multi-state information sharing advisory center that's been great for us. They send us stuff when things go wrong. They let us know when they see things coming out of our network. So it may be because that's on a state level and not a federal level, but I will agree, things typically move faster in government when the lawyers are not involved, right? When someone just makes a decision. One of the things, I don't have any PowerPoints, so I just kind of came to talk about a few things we've got underway. Particularly government, especially in the state level. The executive branch does a great job of sharing. Right now, though, we've had challenges because there's so many areas that are trying to share data. We've got DHS, we've got the Department of Defense through the National Guard. We have our own efforts. The universities like Purdue have some fantastic efforts as well. And how do we merge those all together? So we're working on initiatives right now to try and do that. Those things are in their very infancy. I will tell you it's absolutely a priority for us right now because It could be because when I first came in, day one, the National Association of State CIOs takes you in and gives you a new CIO briefing, and the first thing they tell you is your average lifespan is 23 months. And cybersecurity is one of the biggest reasons you might not be in your seat tomorrow, which is a scary thing. I have found the more times my CISO comes into my office, the more I want to hide under my desk from all the problems. But there are a lot of great initiatives going on. One of the things that I think has been critical to us right out of the get-go was we created a crisis communication plan. We actually worked with DHS as well as with our own staff and our own communications folks who typically are not IT guys. They're the ones we let talk to the media because I don't want to talk to the media. And so they have done a fantastic job of changing our communication plan into something that we can talk to anyone, right? I think it was mentioned in the CrowdStrike presentation by George that sometimes you have to change that techie into, hey, boss, we're getting attacked by the Chinese, and they want this. Well, so that is a particularly a problematic issue for us because when I go to the governor, I need to be able to tell the governor specifically what's going on. And he's a fantastic and incredibly intelligent man, but he doesn't know when we go into geek speak, which us IT guys typically do. So our communications folks have worked with us to develop plans. We've done tabletop exercises, and I think it's been critically important, and those plans have to be updated regularly. It's kind of one of the most important things I think we do from a sharing initiative. We've also done things to reach out to the chambers of commerce, as well as I said previously, we're working with the universities and with DHS to try and better improve our information sharing. Individual counties are doing a lot of things now, and we've done outreach to them as well. But information sharing, at least as far as government goes, is truly in its infancy. And you said it clearly when you talked about the MSI SACs. There's still a lot of things that need to be done. That said, I think we'll have some good questions here, and I'll go to the next speaker with that.
Dave? We're glad that Dave's able to come back to campus here. We realized after he had agreed to come here that he's actually a Purdue grad, so it's been quite a number of years since he'd been back to campus. So.
Yeah, 30 years ago, so lots changed. But I have to say, thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here, but I have to say you guys have me a little depressed now. And I'll tell you why in a little bit. So at Cyberpoint, my interest in data sharing basically stems out of two of my colleagues, Paul Kurtz and Dave Cullinane. So Paul Kurtz worked in the White House doing policy. And Dave Cullinane is was a CISO at eBay for years, and WAMU. And they both had this common frustration when it came to data sharing. Paul understood the legal ramifications. Dave had a $40 million budget at eBay, and he couldn't stop attacks. And he realized the only way to do it was to pick up the phone and call his friends, close personal friends that he had, other CISOs, so they could collaborate. As soon as he wanted to open that up to wider community, as everyone said, lawyers got in the way. So having a huge budget didn't help. You needed the collaboration. You just needed it. So what they wanted to do was find a way to get around the legal aspects. Not really around, but bring them into the fold. And that's the depression part, because everyone so far has said, get around, get around, get around. So we're looking at a method to do that that allows an organization to decide what they want to share and do it as anonymously as possible. Hopefully totally anonymously. You can redact whatever you want out, but share it with the community. Be non-attributable, have an anonymous way to connect, a trusted community that can talk like an ISAC, but have legal pre-approval to do this. Have policies in place, decide what you're going to redact out, authorize certain people to share with the community, and then see what information you get out of that, and if you can actually use it for things that we've talked about for intelligence gathering, and get that message out to all your peers, and maybe get the intelligence in place, both tactically. If I'm being DDoSed, I want to tell my friends right now, like in minutes, and then over time, be able to do the analysis. So our problem is getting past the legal hurdles. So we're trying to do that, and seeing what information you're going to get and how much use you can make of that information. So far we have a lot of interest in the concept, but a lot of people are kind of waiting to see how this goes, what the value could be. One of the, aside from the depressing part, one of the questions that have come back and the lesson learned is you got to pose that problem to the lawyers in a way that they're going to find advantageous. You can't just go say, sharing's great, I'm going to do this, and it's going to help you. You're going to have to tell them why it lowers their liability, why it actually helps them. And that messaging has been a really good lesson out of this. But interested in hearing from you guys and your questions on how well you can anonymize data and what intel you can get out of it. So, thank you.
Michael?
Okay. I'm just going to stay seated to continue. Kind of the spirit of a true panel is it's not scripted, and I can guarantee you this one is not scripted. We've had no preparation in this, and we're just bringing up our comments. And what I find interesting so far is we all have a common denominator already, so this should work out today. I'm going to give you the perspective of incident sharing from more of a cybercrime perspective, because I work in a financial institution and that's what's the most important to us. So I've been doing the same job for about 20 years. If people stop stealing things from the internet, I'm essentially unemployable. So in 1990 to 2000, the attacks that we saw were roughly the same. There's recon, the planning, and then the execution. The collaboration in the hacking community was outstanding. Quick message boards, something gets knocked down and they build it back up. I can guarantee you that in a large corporation, if you need a website, a wiki, or something to that effect, it's going to take a while. So the hackers were sharing at will. It was around 2005 or so in the financial community when large-scale losses started to happen. Stock manipulation and some other large, what are called account compromises took place. And these were different than the credit card thefts, which usually hover around a couple $1,000s per loss. We started to see losses across the industry at $100,000, $500,000, $1 million were absolutely capable of happening. So that drove the first of what I would call the purest of information sharing, almost like a community policing model or a citizen's watch. And I would start to see colleagues that we would call people. I'm supporting what you're saying too at the beginning where you're picking up the phone. And that was people sometimes literally hiding under cubes, calling other people in similar roles in other companies, asking if they could pay, or have you seen this IP address, or what does this mean? Because the concept wasn't widely adopted. So that keeps going, and necessity starts to really build it. 2009 or so to date, I would say that for the financial institutions and kind of attack specific, information sharing is huge. It's driven by the industry, not by the government. I think the government absolutely has, for the FSI SACs and those absolutely have a home, but that's not a place that the quality of the information, it's operations to operations. You don't violate customer agreements or violate privacy laws, but you find ways that you can effectively pass the information, and it is alive and well. For us, investigation is huge. The attribution to support what George spoke about an hour ago, we are able to solve cases that were unsolvable a decade ago. And our cases get publicized on Krebs on Security or a number of places, and that is because of collaboration driven by the victims, which would be industry. So that's my 2 cents.
Sam? Sure.
Well, given the option of stalking around and making anybody nervous and falling off, I think I'll just sit right here too. I thought it was really, really interesting, the idea that we were going to talk about attacks. You know, it had me thinking about, you know, some like big movie blockbuster, you know, guys in the data center, somebody dressed up in a clown suit with a chainsaw going after somebody else. I thought to myself, no, this probably isn't what we're going to be talking about. But what we do see is with a lot of the incidences, by the time myself or one of my students gets called in that's working for you, things have gone bad because we do the digital forensics and incident response side. And by the time we're coming in, it's all over with, everybody's crying, and you're looking for a new CSO. So we like to think about it as we like pushing it out. If you saw any of the posters of students doing stuff from the different countries that they're analyzing, think about that against threat actors. That's what we're actually teaching them, is take that incident response and digital forensics kind of analysis and push it out to the front side where they're actually doing analysis of threat actor groups. You know, when you look at some of the things that go on, Richard Beatlick from Mandiant, I guess it's FireEye now, said that, you know, most of these really large-scale breaches happen over a period of time, and he actually had tracked some for over years. And so this isn't something that's like an instantaneous problem popped up, nobody knew about it. Even with the Target example of their breach, it looks like that was happening over a long period of time, and that collaboration and coordination between different actors would have helped. But that brings up the other problem, which is if I spend, you know, 1% or 0.5% of my corporate profits on doing some kind of mitigation, and I'm sharing data with a corporation that's not doing all of that, now we're into a competitive issue. And so that there's actually an entire set of a hierarchy of how the sharing is going on. So companies get in it, the corporation, the corporate lawyers or general counsel gets involved in it. Next thing you know, you have like, well, what have they given us lately kind of tit for tat going on. And that doesn't necessarily help either. When it's a utility or those kind of things, they've got this down. I recently attended GridX for the electrical sector ISAC, and I was one of the observers while GridX2 was going down. So I watched what was going on from inside the SOC to see what was going on, to give my 2 cents about how I thought they were doing with their sharing alone. And I found that they were actually very, very, very mature in that sharing practice. They had it down pretty much pat. Now that's an exercise. Everybody knows something's going to happen. But what was interesting is that they took their ISAC to about 30 times its normal level of effort. Now think about that. Normally, if you're handling 5 to 8 incidents a day, and we take you to 150, 180 incidents a day, you're saturating that organization. So this was an interesting thing to test, actually stress test the ISAC. I was very, very impressed by what they were doing. But what they had done is they decoupled the regulatory processes of NERC from the ISAC, and secondarily, they created incentive mechanisms for those organizations that were beyond the competitive nature. Because you have everything from community organizations that are running electrical energy systems to you have groups that are running, you know, for-profit energy systems. These, when you start looking at these, there has this competitive nature that it may not be in my best interest. Well, by decoupling those two interests, they were able to push forward the sharing and do real-world threat intelligence sharing on what was going on. So as the incidents were occurring, they were able to link specific activities that if they were not sharing, were not able to be linked. So they're able to say that if the incident A happens in California and see incident B happen in Montana, we can actually look at those and share those and have an idea what's going on. The other things that I've seen is that as we see the adversary classes change, you know, there's always the talk about cyber war and Armageddon and cyberland and all kinds of things, and now people that have been to HackerCons are absolutely falling on the floor drunk because every time I say cyber, they have to take a drink. So I'll say cyber one more time, and the idea here is that as these adversary classes change, you know that you have a series of new methods that have to be involved in the sharing practices. You look at the NIST guidance on incident response, it uses sharing over 20 times in that document. It says you have to share. All over the document it says this. And in looking at that document, if you think about the processes, it doesn't take into account the differences in adversary classes, but what it does take into account is mission orientation. What are you doing and how are you doing it as a mechanism of describing how your sharing should be happening. And so if you decouple the profit motives, if you can create a trusted environment, you can absolutely affect the level of your security.
Thank you, gentlemen. At this time, we're going to open up to questions from the audience, but I'm going to start with the first question while the rest of you gather your thoughts. And the microphone is up here in front. All right, so each of you, or several of you, had mentioned picking up the phone or calling the colleagues when you're ready to share information, or hey, how have you dealt with this issue, or have you seen this before? With this being largely a research symposium, what research is being done in the area that you know of, or what research should be done in the area to maybe help develop technologies that can help the sharing that happen in real time so that we can better protect networks? I'll throw it out to you all.
So one thing I would say that I think is critical, we're working on a lot of things with predictive analytics now, and I think predictive analytics could potentially be the future opportunity to do communications for this. As you see attacks coming into your networks and other networks, not only automated defenses, but automated communications to make everyone aware and all the players, so everyone else can do the same defenses, whether or not they're protected by the same systems.
In our world, trying to do anonymization so you can sort of stay under the covers. You can report the incident without attributing yourself. The two aspects of that are, like I had said, when you redact out things like the IP address that maybe attacked you or email names, how much information can you actually use by the time you're done? Do you have enough to make sense out of it? And then there's a comfort level with being able to anonymize that. If there's a man in the loop pulling terms out, an agreed upon set of terms that your legal system's okay with, there's potential for human error. So can you do, definitely sign up to sticks and standards that you can have entity extraction easily, and if it's not a standard format, can you do natural language processing entity extraction, and then help with the anonymization. If the analysis team can attribute you back, can you call the guy up and say, hey, you didn't really want to send that, I quarantined it. So there's a comfort level in trying to make sure it's really, really anonymized. So
I'd like to make one comment on that as well. I think the anonymization is a really good aspect of it, and no one that I've seen has really been able to crack that nut with anonymizing the data enough so it's not transparent where it's coming from, but not anonymizing it too much where the data becomes completely useless. And that's what we've discovered over the past 10, 15 years or so, is the established government entities that have been funded for many years, such as the CERT team and others like that. They're getting better, but in general, they would kind of whitewash everything. And I know within the Department of Energy, we had passed up lots of detailed information on our incidents, and by the time it had gotten back out to all the other sites, the information, one, was not timely, two, had been so whitewashed that there was no value left to the technical incident response teams that they could actually operate or action on it. The other thing I wanted to bring up was I think a real research opportunity for this area, and it is growing obviously, is the whole authentication and authorization areas. Obviously the OpenAuth and the OpenID projects have really accelerated in the last couple of years, and I'm really appreciative that those have been making good success. But they tend to be very internet focused, and they don't tend to be kind of intranet, and so you kind of want to figure out how, and maybe there's a way of using those technologies now, but how do you link your intranet to one of your peers' intranet for the purpose of sharing that kind of data, because this data becomes so voluminous, you can't just pick up the phone anymore and say, oh, I'll just send you an email. That doesn't work. We're talking about, if not hundreds of gigabytes, terabytes, all right? And so you can't just say, I'll push that up to my Google Drive and you can look at it now. Well, that doesn't work. So I think that's a real opportunity that research could really provide us some benefits.
So I'd like to I'd like to add one thing to that too as well. One of the challenges we have in government is I have a limited subset of folks who have, say, top secret clearances. And sometimes those top secret clearances may be with DHS and not with Department of Defense. So they're only limited in what they can share with each other. And then the challenge is once my guys come back and go, wow, we found out about this particular attack vector, how do they translate that to all the rest of my systems admins so they can defend against it when they're not allowed to tell them a lot of the key information? So it can be truly challenging. There needs to be a better way to disseminate that so we can defend against those known vectors.
Well, I like doing research. And one of the things we've looked at is the idea of taking threat intel, turn that into technical intel, and then into a mitigation strategy. And one of the things we look at in trying to do that is where are your inputs, what are your sensors, what are the things you have to do. And since we have now, as two speakers here have said, we have very targeted attacks going on, it's hard to just use a honeypot or some large broad-based networked system of sensors to gather all the data up what's going on. And so when you're starting to deal with stuff that's very specific to corporations, then it becomes very important to figure out what is the nature of those attacks, because often they're actually coming from other corporate networks, but they may not be driven by those corporate networks. Bringing all that together and fusing that together, using a really bad intelligence term, by fusing all that together, we often have the problem of more of a political process than a technical process. So as we push these kind of things forward, if you look at some of the research that was done by Dr. Spafford's PhD students on anonymization, if you look at some of the threat intelligence stuff done by my students, if you look at some of the anonymization stuff by different people here at CERIAS, you see basically the subset that's needed for creating products like that. But what's hard to do is get the data to be able to actually prove that it works.
So the question was kind of what's academia's role in these types of problem solving?
Any researcher, but just certainly academia, but R&D on the industry side as well.
Okay, sure. So I can cite a number of different ad hoc groups that have popped up, and it's a trilogy of people. So, and it's all driven by problem solving. You have to have a problem first. If you don't, that's difficult. So, and those are driven by victims. They drive the information sharing and the need. The second thing that happens is that what we're talking about, the problem solving, we're talking about our crimes. So law enforcement has a role, and they can be passive. They can just come and listen to the things and see if they can be of assistance. And the third part of that is what I would put into the academia or the researchers to cover both areas for that. And they come and listen and say, rather than me give feedback to say a specific area to research, what I've seen work is that the victims are coming together, sharing information. Hey, we've got this big ring, or we've got this big thing that we think, and it's going back to attribution. And law enforcement's listening, and sometimes they can help, and then other times they can't. And then the researchers are there to say, what if we were to implement this technology, or we were to research this? Would that help solve the problem? And before you know it, that little cycle just keeps, it's repeatable. I've seen it, most of it's been very informal, and it's popped up, and before you know it, what happens is it grows. I'd love to write a paper on this, because there's enough data to follow it now. So where it starts out with 10 or 20 people or so, and then they start getting together and it starts working. Once it gets to a critical mass, then it becomes a lot more rigid, and it starts a lot more on the compliance pieces come in, and it seems to crumble. So we could almost chart it out.
I just want to say one thing about that. That's exactly why I was at the electrical services or sector ISAC, was to do that kind of analysis. And in doing that, we were able to come up with some very interesting results that we were able to push forward. And so absolutely bringing the academic side in. No, it wasn't traditional research, but bringing best practices in that we've seen in academia, we're allowing them to be more successful.
We do it as a practice all the time. Anytime that we're trying to solve it, we always get some of the academics or the researchers to bring it in. And then you can figure out whether the number before it starts to collapse. It's almost like a society that builds up and it gets too big, and then you can say, well, we can only have 89 people here, so and then you say, all right, you have to go home because we're about to collapse.
Dr. Bhargava?
Yeah, hi. Um, I wanted to learn a little bit about this insider-outsider attack from Michael West. And also, I'd like to know a little bit about cross-domain information sharing from Dave Toomey.
Go ahead, Michael. It seems like a hard question. I'm Michael. So you wanted to know, so the insider attack versus comparing the outsider. So this is like basic, to our view, this is really basic investigative techniques that we apply to this, is the insider often has collusion. So they've been let in. They're extremely difficult. The outsider is, they don't know as much. Their method of attack is going to be open source information to get inside it. The insider is being handed PowerPoints and Visio documents to look at what to steal. I guess the only thing that we use as a constant for both of a method is that we're never going to catch. There is a logical order of progression before you commit a crime. You break into somebody's house to steal the stereo. You don't steal the stereo first. You have to go to the door. You have to walk up the driveway. All those things, and we will start to we'll figure out what are we going after, and then we'll write a series of alert functions or something to that capacity for the insider. And once they build up to a certain point, then we'll have somebody start looking at it a little bit deeper. And we use the same principles for the financial fraud. Pardon?
No, cross-domain information sharing.
No, Dave Fiore. Oh, very good. Okay. No problem. Kevin, and I turned the speaker off, so if you could hit the button on the top. There you go. Thank you.
So I'm curious to know, when data information sharing works at present, when people are doing it, what does it look like? Are you putting all the data in a common database? Is it just phone conversations? Would it be useful if academia were to come up with something where, partner A wants to look at partner B's data, and there's some API where they can get access to the data, and maybe there's a lot of good access controls in place. Is that something that people would accept, or somewhere where academia could contribute, or is it more of a, I don't know, how does it work basically, and where would you like to see it go?
I have one example. You want me to start?
I'll start and then we'll go on. Yeah, so I think we all probably have some good examples, but it just kind of struck a chord with me because it brought back many memories of going on site to various DOE labs, and it was always a scramble at the last minute because we get a call, and usually it was like the incident response team manager at site X calling our incident response team manager. And we say, hey, you guys, have to go out and help out, site X. And we get our bags together that afternoon or night, and we'd show up first thing in the morning. And it was like I would always pack like a big, 1 or 2 terabyte NAS drive, right, with me. I mean, because we found this to be completely, foundational to any of us actually sharing any data once we got there. Because once we got there, even though we're operating within the same kind of government agency, each site within the Department of Energy will have their own security domain, and our security domains do not talk to each other, and necessarily some do, some don't. It's all based on whether site X actually likes site Y enough to open up some type of Kerberos sharing or whatever, and so we couldn't rely on that, and we want to have accounts there. Believe it or not, I don't have my badge on now, but I have a government CAC badge, right? And you think, oh, they're all the same, right? They're white with a nice smart chip and everything. Well, we're from Sandia. We show up at Site X. Our badges don't work there. Right? It's like, why do we spend $10 billion on these government badges and then we'd have to go spend 2 hours in their badge office trying to get our badge enrolled in their badge system, and it's like, my God, we wasted the whole first day just trying to get into the physical site. And then we'd have to get, our secure ID cards don't work with their secure ID card system, and so on and so on. So the list goes on. And that was one of the things that really drove me to the point of trying to say, well, let's start really thinking about how to formalize this, because The ad hoc sharing is great, but we continually face, every time we went on an incident, we faced those same kinds of problems. And those are just administrative problems, all right? We hadn't even begun to tackle the technical challenge of actually helping them to solve their cyber attack. So usually on day 2, we actually start to work. By day 3, we're starting to actually get to know the problem. And by the end of the first week, we're becoming somewhat, helpful to them. And so we'd have to spend 2 weeks minimum. And like I said, we bring, I have a whole bunch of Black Pelican cases, and we still travel with those. And we bring all our shared NAS drives. We bring a bunch of extra computers and everything. And we come with a team of small team, about 3 or 4 people. And each person on that team would have a particular expertise. So my expertise was in digital forensics. I'd bring a guy who was really good at reverse engineering, bring a guy who was really good at doing the network packet deobfuscation and decryption, and then usually a guy that's sort of just going to be sort of that intel guy, help to put it all together and work with the team that we're working with there. And then what happened after 2 weeks? Generally, we'd have those nice one-on-one conversations, but the kind of, the immediate fires were put out, and a lot of that immediate sense of we have to do something has kind of waned a bit, and we sort of go back to normal mode. And so everything we did there was great for helping to build those relationships, and I wanted to, continue it with our, global kind of solution, but as I said, that didn't work. So it's still at the place we're talking about right now.
So who asked the question? Yeah, excellent question, by the way. So this is how you, I assume you come from an academic background or researcher?
I got a PhD.
Okay.
I'm in industry now.
Okay. So this is how, when I explain the trilogy of the problem solving, this is how you would help. You don't tell anybody how to share stuff. You can't do that. Anybody ever see Starsky and Hutch with Woogie Bear? So like you don't go to Woogie Bear and tell them, hey, you got to fill this form out, or go to this website, this portal. Portal for a lot of people is a bad word, myself included. I like automation. I can't stand portals. So they have their place, but for the most part. So you can do it in 2 ways. One is that you can figure out machine to machine how to pass stuff that's pretty predictable in quantity, IP addresses, other components that you would use, MTAs that are common, things that are going to be in bulk, tens of thousands of rows, millions of rows, whatever. Then the second piece of it, the way we've solved it, which is, I would say it's, one step above the caveman hunting with a rock and smashing something over the head, is that we've let people pass information in whatever they choose, emails, whatever. And then we have a party in the middle that reads stuff. And they have a Python-generated GUI that loads the data, and they're going to scan and look for important pieces of information, and they tag it. We aptly named it the tagger. And they go through and tag pieces of data that are useful, and then it gets loaded into a structured database. I would argue that that's version 1, and that if some smart people looked at that for a while, they could come up with version 2 for that. And that's exactly how you would find ways to make it better. But don't tell people you can't share unless you put it in this format, or you're going to lose information.
Yeah, in our world, we totally agree with you can't tell people how to share or what to share. So on format or whatever they want to share, in our world it's anonymized, and they get to choose exactly what they want to share. But once they do, getting data turned around really quickly is important, because we view it as a community function, not driven by a central arbiter. So once you anonymize it and you can verify that there's nothing attributable in it, which that's the technology part, you want to be able to do that quickly for them, you throw it into a central database and you reflect that out to them. And you allow tags for alerts for people to want, if they want to see something really important, I'm being DDoSed now, everyone in my community needs to know that. And a tool to be able to filter if you're taking in many different sectors and many different customers. I'm not interested in a mountain of data coming at me. I'm interested in my peers, maybe tangential sectors, and maybe I don't care that you have Microsoft servers, mine are all Linux. I want to be able to filter on that kind of thing. So I need to filter it down to what I care about. And so you're getting sort of the constant feed of that data immediately, tactically. And then there is an organization in the back that's doing analysis. But first, get the data out to the people who want it. And then the other aspect is provide collaboration, a way for them to, with an alias or anonymously, ask a question about what's in the database. So there's a conversation going. You're opening up that, picking up the phone, right? It's not just your close friends, it's everyone in the group. Yeah. Right now, we just picked up the...
If you could somewhat recap so that it's captured for the recording system.
Okay, so STIX and TAXI are formats for incident response, reporting, and transferring of data. So our first inclination was, you know, when we talk to people, some of them are very mature. They want STIX, right? Anybody in the FSI sec. Some of them are like, well, I send PowerPoints up to my CIO and CISO. Okay, so we said we would take unformatted anything. And some people are like, what do you put in an incident report, right? So we said, all right, we'll give you a form you can fill in, and it looked like STIX. We like STIX. The latest one that came out, the 1.1 in February, came with Python interface tools and seemed pretty stable. So we've taken it, we like it, we'll suck it in. The problem for us, again, is the automatic deattribution, right? Right now, you know, it's caveman. Somebody's got to look at it. And you can help them with templates, you can redact data and take it out, but ultimately somebody's got to look at it right now. And that's where STIX helps, because it gives you an entity where you can go, oh, that's an IP address source of something, and I can compare that to a list. But the entity extraction for the unformatted stuff, in order to automatically do the anonymization, you're going to have to pull out entities to compare to phone numbers, names, email addresses, company aliases, product. I mean, there's so many things that can attribute you. It's a hard problem.
I just had one more comment to follow up on the STIX question. So, and we thought about this a number of years ago, and that was a big problem, was the unformatted, right? So every site had their own way of collecting reporting data, and then DOE tried to formalize that with their formal reporting systems, right? Which it was good for that first initial triage, right? Because they could get out and say, oh, there's an attack occurring against this particular, you know, type of web server, this version, and everything. Okay, so we got that much. That's about all, you know, that you know, gave us. But the STIX thing, we haven't adopted it yet because we've developed, you know, and we're probably more mature than some other sites within DOE as far as our own incident repository, incident reporting system within our site. And so the STIX doesn't really mesh up with what we developed. We spent the last, you know, 4 or 5 years developing our own kind of repository. The analysts are used to that, and now it's like, oh, we want to share data in STIX. We have to, you know, pay our development team probably the next 6 months to a year to integrate all that kind of stuff, to extract out that data, put it into a STIX format. So it's a good idea, but I don't know if it'll work, and I don't know how much, you know, organizations, government or private, will adopt it because of that.
Our developer was really happy with the back-end tools. You might want to look at it.
Okay,
Take
I'll
a look
mention,
at it.
yeah.
I'm Tim Grants from this nondescript government agency, and I just wonder, you know, I've heard for many years about the exhortations to share and to collaborate and do things, and, you know, we are the world, all that sort of thing. And I'm just wondering if you might have more useful productivity if you focused on machine-to-machine communications. The carbon units are slow, evolution is slow, but you know, things like technical use cases, very technical ones on, you know, memory mapping and obfuscation, and this would create more pull to share if there's actual value to share. When you write these heavyweight STIX things that tend to be written by people who want to gather the world into specs, they tend to junk up specs, very thick, very heavy, because we don't want to miss anything, instead of sparse ones to you can improve over time. So I'm cranky about those. But my question to you really is about, could you just focus more on very technical use cases on sharing, creating a pull and a demand for it, and you overcome the human sociological issues with sharing. You'll have much more success inside an FSISAC in terms of, which there is great success in places like that, if they would just share their driving imperatives, and the technical pull for that will create sharing, and others will catch up once they see the ultimate value in technical sharing. Comments?
I'll jump on that one.
It helps them protect the rest of their customers. So we think that's where it's going. And I do believe individual states are seeing that, not just Indiana. Michigan's opened up a training and information center, as well as several other states are working on that right now. So I think it's a trend that's coming.
I just wanted to jump on one other point about that, is that when we started doing some of this information sharing back in 2003, 2004, that era, that internet boom era, there was a lot of questions about who do I share with, and I do that trusted third party thing where I get called in by a CSO saying, we had this big incident, Sam, and can you help us out, make sure it never happens again? And I usually say, no, it's going to happen again, which then the tears begin. But the thing I started doing was going down to the technical level, getting down to the guys actually doing the job, and I said, who do you have in your Rolodex that has, you have every phone number they have. You have their home number, you have their cell number, you have their wife's number, you have their girlfriend's number, all that kind of stuff. Those are the people that you trust at the technical level. That's the people you want to start sharing with formally. And the next thing we started doing was I started what I called the Moleskin Index. I looked at it around different administrators, especially in the government where they have the high side and you have all these guys that can't record anything. You walk around and you look at the number of moleskins sitting there because that's all their incident data, right? And I said, well, where is that formalized? And back then, nobody was formalizing this. There was no sharing of that incident data as case studies. So now we're going forward. We've started to actually automate some of these processes. We've started to actually create information sharing organizations. And they don't happen necessarily even between academia. They happen between the interested parties, which creates a granularity issue. But what it does is it allows at least some of that to happen. I think you'll see now is industry partnerships will start to emerge and drive that forward as more professional service.
And in our case, we are trying to find coalitions of industry right now who are already sharing. We've run into a few as like early desires to do it. They're sharing NDAs and things like that, trying to establish the personal relationships, and they're looking for a tool to do it. So we have not had success yet, but we know of a couple who are very, very interested right now. There is, I like to bring up the chicken and egg problem that Sam brought up, having data and giving a picture of what this looks like, particularly not just to the lower level people, but the legal staff, because you got to engage them in our model to say, okay, under these rules for this kind of anonymization and this product coming out, would you authorize Bob down in your IT group to review this and send it out to share, right? And so they need a concrete picture of the value of that and what it would look like. And we've had a hard time forming that because it is hard to get anyone to share data. So for us, it's engaging a legal group with data to give them that picture, and then finding willing parties where, we would love to partner with academia and states and people willing to do it, to work the model to be able to show the value that you either can anonymize this enough and still have enough data left over or not.
So I just had one comment. So I think looking back in time a little bit, I think there was a kind of that, what do you call it, watershed moment or something, about 2010 or December 2009 maybe, when Google did their disclosure about Operation Aurora. And I think that was a key point in time if you look back in the last 10 or 15 years, because up to that point, either a lot of the government contractors and private sector companies were either in pure denial or just in pure state of ignorance. And we were going out and we were seeing all this happening, and we couldn't believe that we were talking to banks and insurance companies and state governments, and they were all saying, we don't have a problem. We don't know what you're talking about, Kevin. And I just would have that moment where I have the V8, thing hit myself in the forehead. Like, really? Are you serious? And I think what happened when Google disclosed, a lot of other companies said, ooh, if this can happen to Google, this can happen to us, right? And Google has spent a huge amount of money now since. They've been hiring a lot of, really smart researchers and stuff. So I'm kind of, every chance I get, I kind of, talk to the folks, like from the big Silicon Valley companies, say, what are they doing? Because I know there must be something going on out there in Silicon Valley, because obviously, if you talk about a brain trust in the United States, I would say we're heavily, weighted on the scale on the left coast there because of Silicon Valley. So I'd love to have conversations after our panel here with anybody who can, share some other stories or enlighten me, because I'd love to figure out what it is that, various industries are doing, in this area, because we at Sandia Labs, we have a lot of smart people, but, we don't always get out of our little caves, and sometimes it's nice to get out of our cave here and be able to interact. They only let me out once a year, so unfortunately this is my one day, so I get to talk, and then I'll be back in my cave, so thanks.
And with that, will you please join me in thanking our panel for their participation today.